And now let's talk Fiesta Bowl with Ben Axelrod, senior writer for LandOf10.com. Great follow on Twitter, too, as well. Let's start with the big news of the day. The Luke Fickell, new head coach at Cincinnati. How does that impact the Buckeyes? He says he's staying, but does it still impact them at all for Clemson?
You know, I don't think it does. You look back to 2014, and you had a similar situation with Tom Herman. Last year with Alabama, they were dealing with the same thing when Kirby Smart went to Georgia and stayed on the staff. So, you know, they're used to this. Chris Ash left last year and stayed on for a Fiesta Bowl that wasn't even a playoff game. So I think they've kind of got the formula down as far as this is concerned. And as far as an impact, I don't think it will be one. I think Luke Fickell will want to hit the ground running from a recruiting standpoint with another national title under his belt.
It's true.
Well, there are rumors swirling out there today. Kerry Combs, though, said he is going to stay at Ohio State, but we are hearing the offensive coordinator, Ed Warner, could be on the move. Maybe perhaps Western Kentucky is looking at him. 10 TV also reporting that Temple is interested in him. Do you think that Urban will lose another assistant by the end of the year?
You know, I do. That's just the reality of running a program like an Ohio State. You look at Alabama, they lose assistants year in and year out. They're probably going to lose Lane Kiffin. Urban's been fortunate. He's been able to maintain continuity for the most part year to year, but every few years you are going to have one of those seasons where a bunch of guys leave from your staff. So Ed Warner's the one I would look at. Greg Schiano is interesting because he has ties to the NFL, but for the most part, I think if you can maintain some semblance of continuity on both sides of the ball and you have Urban Meyer, you're going to be in pretty good shape.
I want to ask you this because, Ben, if you would have asked me a few months ago which assistant would leave, I would have thought Schiano was a lock. I figured he was a one-and-done, John Calipari-type recruit. Are you as surprised as I am that he might be back for a second year?
I'm stunned, and to me, that's the biggest recruiting job Urban Meyer has done since he got to Ohio State. I mean, you talk about a guy who is completely overqualified for his role as a coordinator. This guy was a head coach in the NFL 3 years ago. He's interviewed a handful of places. I mean, big-time programs like the U down in Miami and Oregon. I mean, this is a guy who, you know, just from a coaching standpoint, might be like the third best head coach in the Big Ten right now. And he's Ohio State's defensive coordinator. So, yeah, to get him back, and especially with Luke Fickell moving on to Cincinnati, and really it is Greg Schiano's scheme they're running, to me, that's a massive win for this Ohio State program.
Let's move on to that semifinal game, of course, the Fiesta Bowl. J.T. Barrett against Deshaun Watson. How confident are you in Barrett's ability to kind of hold up his end of things and to show what he can do in that game?
Yeah, I'm confident in JT. I'm not as confident in this Ohio State offensive line against the Clemson defensive line. We saw the way this Ohio State offensive line has struggled in pass protection against Penn State and against Michigan, and this Clemson team might be the best defensive line it's faced yet. So I think there's interesting matchups. I think the OSU offensive line versus the Clemson D-line is one, and then I think another one is Deshaun Watson's turned the ball over 15 times, and this Ohio State defense, especially the secondary, has been very opportunistic when it's come to forcing turnovers. So those are, to me, the two matchups that are kind of going to decide this game one way or another.
Well, Kayla mentioned Deshaun Watson, this Clemson offense, very good, ranked 13th in the nation, yards per game, just over 500 a game. Can the Buckeye defense keep them in check here?
I think so. I mean, that's one thing that's flown under the radar is we've talked so much about this Ohio State passing attack and its inconsistencies, but the defense has held up its end of the bargain throughout the year, and it's really turned into one of the better defenses in all of college football. Deshaun Watson, I mentioned that the interceptions, that's going to be very big for this team, and he's really come on and had a strong stretch down the end of the season. So, yeah, I mean, this is going to be a tough matchup. They have three big wide receivers. So, yeah, I mean, you look at the playoff, and this is the premier matchup in the playoff, and for good reason.
Well, this is a rematch of the Orange Bowl a few years ago. There aren't too many players on Ohio State's roster who appeared in that game. So this revenge storyline, is this overplayed?
Yeah, I don't think there's much revenge.
No.
I mean,
not the Pat Elflein. It's real to me, baby.
For Cam Johnston, I mean, Cam Johnston was on that field in Miami. He knows what that sting of defeat to the Tigers is. Not too many other guys. Elflein didn't play in the game. I don't even know if Dontre Wilson got on the field.
I don't think he was on the field,
So, yeah, I mean, but that was an interesting matchup because, to me, that was what legitimized Clemson as kind of that national power on par with an Ohio State and with an Alabama, and we've seen it now. Alabama's been to the playoff 3 times, and then Ohio State and Clemson have each been there twice. So, yeah, I mean, that was a big game, I think, for Clemson, just as far as what it did to legitimize that program. So, you know, maybe there is something there between Urban Meyer and Dabo Swinney and what those two guys have on the line with where they've taken their programs in the past 3 years.
I think we're all expecting a close game between Ohio State and Clemson. Alabama favored by 17. over Washington. Okay, if there's a 17-point underdog in the college football playoff, is that proof we didn't get the best 4 teams?
I think we have to wait to see if Washington covers or not. I mean, that's a lot of points to lay.
If they lose by 3, then...
I mean, you could point to last year what Alabama did to Michigan State.
It was a
and
debacle.
I think that kind of did affect the playoff committee's thinking. You know, I personally thought there was going to be more conversation about Ohio State and not having that Big Ten title, but I think the committee just said, you know what, we know Ohio State's one of the 4 best teams in the country. We want Ohio State in this playoff. So, you know, right now I think Washington deserved it. I think we overlooked them because they are on the West Coast. But, yeah, that's a lot of points to lay in a game that's supposed to help determine who the national champion's going to be.
It's weird, though, because it is just one of those things that I'm from the Pac-12, and it is one of those things when you're on the West Coast, and now I've lived on the East Coast for so long, you do kind of just pass them over, I guess you could say, because we don't really know how strong that Pac-12 conference is. You don't get to see a lot of play of that. You talked to some of the players earlier this week about going pro. How big could this draft class be?
I think this is the hidden storyline, Ben. I think people think, oh, they're young, they'll be back.
Right.
The same thing could happen.
No, it's a lot of guys who are redshirt sophomores, true juniors, guys who are eligible to leave after this year. There's a lot of guys with decisions on their hands. I know Malik Hooker said he's coming back as of right now.
He doubled down.
He reiterated as of right now about 10 times. So as of right now, a lot of things can change in the next month. Curtis Samuel has a decision on his hands. The defensive ends, Tyquan Lewis and Sam Hubbard, and even Jalen Holmes, a guy who's played a lot this year. And then, to me, the big one is J.T. Barrett. What does he really have left to prove coming back to Ohio State another year? Another year in Columbus isn't going to make him 6'4" and your prototypical NFL passer. So, yeah, it could be a whole nother makeover for this Buckeyes roster. But aside from Alabama, if there's one program in the nation that's proven it can do it year in and year out, it's the Buckeyes.
Hey, Ben, great stuff. Thank you so much for joining us. Let's go from college football now, though. Talk a little high school football, okay?